also want to share with you some upcoming events. We have a tour of DC Superior Court, and that is Tuesday, June 20th. You'll find information on our website about that. I will say there are only 2 spots left. So if you want to get a tour of and meet with judges in debt collection, domestic relations, domestic violence, or landlord-tenant branches, please go ahead and register because there are only 2 spots left. We are going to do another open house, DC Superior Court open house in October. And so if you miss it this time, don't fret. You'll be able to go maybe in October. We also have some really exciting members only events coming up. One for law students in particular. We're going to talk about postgraduate fellowships, like I talked about yesterday. That's in July. And we have an event at Mayweather Boxing for members also in July. Speaking of membership, it's a great community to be a part of. In the chat, we'll put some information about how you can join along with our upcoming events. And so we hope to see you again. You'll see, as you saw on the slides, some benefits of membership. I think another benefit is this community. And so we are glad that you are here. With that, I'd like to introduce Susie Hoffman, who is the public service partner at Kroll. She is one of the very first. She is the pioneer in the dedicated pro bono leadership at law firms. She has been a dedicated public servant for all of her career, and we're thrilled that she is here. And I will turn it over to Susie to introduce you to the panel.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. It is fabulous to see you all, virtually at least. I've been following the chat to see who all has been joining us, and it's great to see representation from law firms and various public interest organizations. I saw Bread for the City and Southern Poverty Law Center, so it's just terrific to have you joining us today. And I know one of the things that our summer associates and even our young associates are interested in learning about is how to structure or how to design a public interest career. And so one of the things that I like to do, rather than giving an extensive bio of our panelists, is to briefly introduce them, and then as the initial question, have them explain their bio and their trajectory about how they got where they are today. So briefly, I will just tell you who our panelists are going to be this afternoon. Vanessa Batters-Thompson, who is at DC Appleseed. Cassie Ehrenberg, who's at the Lawyering Project. Jim Joseph, who's a partner at Arnold & Porter. And Daryl Maxwell, who is at the Small Business and Nonprofit Legal Assistance Program of the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. So I'm going to call first on Daryl to tell us a little bit about what he does in his current position, but more importantly, to lead off with how he got to that position in his career. So Daryl, take it away.
Thank you, Susie. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you today and to be with this esteemed group. I've been a part of this panel for going on at least 10 years, if not longer. And I will say sort of day to day at the Pro Bono Center, the largest provider of pro bono legal services and information in the District of Columbia, I manage our transactional pro bono practice. And so for those of you who were watching today, who are afraid to do pro bono in a courtroom, that's why you come to me. That's why my job exists. There are lots. I work mainly with nonprofits and small businesses, and for folks in our communities who have really great ideas, who are doing really great service to our community, who are employing our neighbors and our friends and the people who you see on the metro every day if you live here in DC. And so those businesses need help with contracts. They need reviews of their leases. Those nonprofits need help with their governance structure and to get set up, and a number of other things. And so we provide training and education for those organizations. We provide longer term pro bono support through the help of law firms like Crowell & Moring and Arlen Porter and others. And so that's what I do sort of on a day-to-day sort of regular basis. Thinking back on the not so linear route I took to this job, after, when I was in the position that when I was in the position where many of you are right now, used my summers, worked at a law firm, did a summer abroad. Probably the best thing I've done in the last, other than marry my wife in the last 20, 25 years, was do a summer program that GW offers at Oxford to study international human rights law. I thought that might be where I would go. Worked at a law firm, didn't love it. As a summer associate, after graduating from GW Law School, was an antitrust lawyer. Didn't really love that either, but I did that for 3 years. While I did that, however, I did pro bono work as a means to sort of change, sort of learn new skills. That's how I learned everything I know, or most of what I know now about business law and transactional sort of pro bono work. And when the opportunity became available to work at the Pro Bono Center, sort of managing, or at least at the time being a part of their transactional pro bono team, I jumped at that. And of the number of people who applied for that particular job, it was my pro bono experience, not stuff that I did at the law firm that had literally no connection to what I would be doing on a day-to-day basis, that put me ahead of many other candidates. And so I always make sure to sort of highlight that as a means to accentuate that your first job isn't your only job. So for some people it might be, but generally it's not. And because of that, you don't necessarily have to think of your first job or all of your experiences going directly in one particular route. I now also teach at GW, and when I'm talking with law students, we always talk about the different steps you can take to grow a career. Some of that is pro bono work, which I think is extremely valuable. Some of that is boards that you might sit on that aren't just for stepping stones. Sometimes it's just to do the good, hard work that community-based nonprofits need, and they need people like all of you to support them, to donate to them, but to give them and to lead and be the lifeblood of their respective organizations. Susie, I could talk forever. You know that already. I will stop there.
But I think that's helpful. And one thing that, pops out to me is, where you admit, like, I really didn't love this position. And just so that folks are prepared, there are going to be stepping stones that you may not love, but ultimately they sort of move you in a positive direction. So just to know what to expect. So I think that's really helpful. And we're grateful that you ended up where you are. So sort of on the other end of the coin, I saw him smiling when you said, well, your first job is not necessarily going to be your ultimate job. I think somebody who came close to doing that is Jim Joseph. So I'm going to let Jim talk a little bit about his trajectory. And I'll ask you, Jim, to wait to talk about the nitty-gritty of some of your cases for a little bit later, but mostly about your career trajectory.
Sure. Thank you, Susie. And nice to sort of see everyone virtually, or I assume you're out there somewhere. My career might look a little more linear than many others. I have been at Arnold & Porter for 34 years. I started here as a first-year associate. I was a summer associate and a law clerk somewhere else. So and had worked before I went to law school. So it wasn't literally my first job. But even within my career at the law firm, it has not been a linear progression. I started, I'm a tax lawyer, by profession. I started out as a tax litigator, and through one of the litigation matters I worked on as a junior associate, representing the League of Women Voters, to help support them and how their sponsoring of the presidential debates were in fact nonpartisan, even though they didn't invite, every single candidate. They did have some criteria that was still considered considered to be nonpartisan, and so that they wouldn't lose their tax status. And I had been doing some pro bono work already at that point in the nonprofit area. I had worked for a couple of nonprofits before I went to law school, so I knew it was something that interested me, but I had no idea that I'd be able to do that as a career. But sort of since being about a 4th or 5th year associate, my career has changed. So I now represent nonprofits and high net worth individuals on their charitable and advocacy and political goals. So, that's something that when I was in law school, I didn't know existed as an option. And I was able to build that here at the firm where we didn't really have this kind of practice, just by being very opportunistic, looking for opportunities or options where I could build my resume and build my experience. And pro bono played a huge part of that in getting experience, getting connections in particular communities, while doing work for some incredibly good organizations. It's not an either or. So, you don't have to, I feel that I've been able to do a balance with firm work and doing a lot of public interest work, particularly civil rights stuff, over the years. And so I think that's the other thing to keep in mind, just constantly be looking, even in your first job, how are you going to start learning skills? How are you going to be getting experience then that may help you in your current job, but also may help you, might lead to your next job. So I will.
That's great, Jim. Thank you. And I think I should say, for those of you who, find yourself at firms, for economic reasons or otherwise, Jim was fortunate to, and he probably did this intentionally, to be at a firm that has very strong pro bono culture. And that, so if you're going to be at a firm and have choices, definitely seek out firms like Arnold & Porter that have very vibrant pro bono cultures. And so next, somebody I know part of her career trajectory, because I worked with her a lot in her just previous position, but I'd love for her to tell you about her whole trajectory, which I think is really interesting. Vanessa Batters-Thompson, who is now at DC Appleseed, the executive director there.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for Washington Council of Lawyers for hosting this panel. I'm really happy to be here. I actually love this topic because I'm sort of the other end of the spectrum from Jim. I have not started in one place and stayed there. I've been kind of all over the map, and I think that actually was a really good preparation for my current role. So I am the executive director at DC Appleseed. DC Appleseed's mission is to make DC a better place to live or work for everyone that's here. We achieve our mission through research, collaboration, and advocacy. Sometimes we engage in litigation, but that's really not the bulk of our practice. The bulk of our practice is public policy work through a variety of different methods. And DC Appleseed is part of a larger network, the Appleseed Network, which has 20 centers in the District of Columbia, the United States, and Mexico. At its core, the entire Appleseed Network is a volunteer organization. It was founded by graduates of Harvard Law School, and their goal was to provide attorneys, including pro bono attorneys, opportunities to volunteer and use their skills to achieve systemic change. So volunteers and pro bono work are right at the heart of my work. Our program does touch on a wide variety of different subjects. We have work that focuses on elections. We focus on DC rights. We have a health equity practice, workforce development, gun safety work, and early childhood education. It's a really diverse range of projects. And I think my diverse experiences and my diverse roles before getting here have really prepared me well for the idea that I'm not just going to focus in one area. I heard something in both Jim and Daryl's presentations that I want to sort of elevate, and that's opportunities. I can't stress enough that trying new things and going the extra mile and going above and beyond the basics of your role will be what helps you progress in your career. So prior to being at DC Appleseed, I was a colleague of Daryl's at the Pro Bono Center. While Daryl focused on transactional work, I focused on litigation and services for individual representation. I would consider my work to either be poverty law or access to justice. It kind of depended on the day. But I worked in a variety of different areas, including family law, housing, public benefits, probate, consumer law, and healthcare access, coordinating both live clinics and long-term representation for individuals through volunteers. I also ran the Pro Bono Center's individual representation training program while I was there. Prior to that, I was at Bread for the City. I was an attorney of the day, and I also did systemic advocacy around child support issues. So I was really a litigator who was doing some additional public policy work on the side. And prior to that, I had an academic fellowship at GW. I was a fellow in their Jacob Burns Community Legal Clinic. So I was working with law students who were handling family and civil litigation clinics in DC Superior Court, mentoring them and ensuring that they were providing the representation that our clients needed. During law school, I spent 2 summers at the Public Defender Service working in their mental health division. I also spent some time at the Animal Law Litigation Project, which is a joint project between the Humane Society of the United States and GW. That was a great experience because it actually let me touch on administrative law and large class actions, which I actually draw on quite heavily today. So if there's one thing I would highlight for all of you, it's try things, try different things, try new things. Don't get pigeonholed. Take a broad approach to your work because the opportunities are out there if you look for them. I don't think I expected my career trajectory. It's been sort of an unfolding pleasant surprise. So I would just encourage you, if you don't have an interior roadmap of where you're going, don't be discouraged. Not everybody takes the same path, and sometimes just being true to yourself and being true to your interests and your skills is the best thing you can do. So I'll stop there, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Oops, great. Thanks a lot, Vanessa. And finally, we have one of our other new panelists, Cassie Ehrenberg, who's at the Lawyering Project, and she will tell us how she got where she is today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Susie, and thank you to the other panelists. Again, my name is Cassie Ehrenberg. I use she, her pronouns. My title at the Lawyering Project is Senior Counsel for Pro Bono Initiatives, so I think I am in the right place. I'll start at the beginning. In law school, I focused on public interest work and internships. I did a lot of work with my clinics in law school. And then I went and did a clerkship with the Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court. I know this isn't a clerkship panel, but I would encourage everybody to think not only about clerkships generally, but to think about your state courts as well. It was a unique and powerful experience to be part of a cert court, where every case that we considered was interesting and carefully attended to. I then spent the next many years of my life at a single firm. I practiced union side labor law. That was the focus of the law firm's work. We did traditional labor law, some employment law, and ERISA work for Taft-Hartley funds, which are jointly sponsored union and employer funds. I had a heavy litigation load focusing on the federal courts and on alternative dispute resolution. What was interesting about this work, and what I think I want to highlight for you all, is that this was a firm that sort of walked the line between the binary that we often create between law firm work and public interest work. Union side firms and other firms like union side firms are certainly for-profit businesses, but they are simultaneously run as mission-driven entities. And there are a lot of firms that operate this way: immigration law practices, employee-side employment law firms, family law firms, civil rights firms, to name a few. So I spent a number of years at this firm in the traditional way. I started off as an associate. I was then a senior associate and then eventually became a partner. I came to my current role at the Lawyering Project in the fall of this year. I also did a lot of work outside of my law practice, volunteering in my community, serving on board, et cetera. So I had a lot of other experiences to draw from. And now I'm at the Lawyering Project. The Lawyering Project is a nonprofit project of the Tide Center, which is our fiscal sponsor. We work throughout the United States to improve access to reproductive health. We specifically focus on access to abortion. As you can imagine, our fight has become much more intense recently. Our clients include providers, abortion funds, practical support organizations, researchers, and other supporters of abortion access. The Lawyering Project blends traditional impact litigation with other programs that focus on client advising. In this space, we're fairly new. We will mark our 6-year anniversary in the fall. Our founder and director is Stephanie Toti, and she argued the landmark case Whole Women's Health before the Supreme Court. So I'll talk a little bit more about my role at the Lawyering Project, I think, as the panel continues, but I do want to note one thing here, which I think is what brings me to this panel specifically, is that part of my role at the Lawyering Project and leading the Pro Bono Initiatives team is to manage and run the Abortion Defense Network. The Abortion Defense Network was created in the wake of the Dobbs decision, when reproductive rights organizations across the country realized that providers, supporters, and patients would be in desperate need of legal advice and counsel as they tried to navigate the new and changing and hostile legal landscape that they were faced with. And so the Abortion Defense Network was created out of that, and it is a partnership with 5 other national reproductive rights organizations and 7 of the country's most esteemed private law firms, which provide pro bono legal assistance to the clients. Among them is Arnold and Porter. I can name the others if folks are interested, but thank you to Jim. And with that, I will hold off on the rest of my comments as Susie deems fit. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, Cassie. One thing I think is interesting, as I have heard the sort of career roots of everyone, is that at some point, each of our panelists have done litigation and have moved on and have seen that they indeed can make a difference without going to court. And so that's why our panel focuses on how you can have a fulfilling public interest career or do pro bono work without going to court. And so we cover both transactional, pro bono, and also policy issues. And so there's just 2 examples of ways that you can do pro bono and public interest without engaging in litigation. So you may say, well, what does that mean? You know, what exactly is transactional pro bono? Can you give me some examples? So I'm going to turn to Daryl, who meets out when I have a transactional attorney who wants pro bono. I often contact Daryl and say, what do you got?
Sure. So that, you know, there are a couple different ways we can sort of satisfy transactional pro bono and sort of what it needs. And I think for a lot of the sort of pro bono community has always been sort of comfortable and aware of pro bono and support for nonprofit organizations. You know, a good example might be organizations like Appleseed and the Lawyering Project. Those are nonprofit organizations that need support with governance. They all have bylaws. They all have boards of directors. They all have employees. And sometimes you need somebody to review an employment manual. Sometimes you need a set of bylaws to be reviewed. Sometimes an organization, a nonprofit, is going to merge with another nonprofit, and you need some help for both parties to walk through that legal process. But additionally, you know, and our sort of nonprofit or our transactional pro bono as it relates to businesses has grown, you know, tremendously over the last 15, 20 years, but particularly, I think a lot of folks have taken notice over the last 3 to 4 years, particularly during the the height of the pandemic, a lot of folks noticed the pizza shop that I love isn't open, and maybe it's not going to open again. And what happens to the person who owns it? What happens to the employees? How can I help them? What do they need? And for folks who have transactional skills, there are any number of ways you can get involved. Again, they all have contracts, they all have leases, they all have vendors. There's any sort of number of needs that business owners also have. And so, and I know Christine and I were talking earlier about, well, I'm a tax lawyer. I'm an investment funds lawyer. What sort of pro bono work can I do? I'm an intellectual property lawyer. I understand patents. I understand trademarks. But how could I do that pro bono? Well, let me tell you, there is, again, like I said, there are any number of needs that, and again, I will use the pizza place example. A pizza place here in DC may have a similar mark, for example, a similar sign outside their door to another place in New York. And I will tell you this because we had this exact thing happen. We had, I think it was a place that sold meat products and sandwiches. They had a sign, and they had Three Pigs was their logo, and there was a similar place in New York, and I think their place had it was the French name for Three Pigs. I don't speak French, so I don't remember exactly what that is. And they got into an intellectual property dispute, and so the place here located sort of on Georgia Avenue was like, we don't really know what to do. We got this letter. We can barely afford to stay open. Like, how are we going to be able to pay somebody to help us get through this? That's where we come in. And again, typically disputes aren't always resolved in court. Oftentimes the dispute is resolved through letters, through phone calls, through negotiation. And so there is, again, the universe is fairly vast on what transactional pro bono can do. And please don't think just because, I have nothing but respect for all of our colleagues who are helping keep people in homes, who are helping keep families together. But there is an access to justice component for that business owner that is trying to continue to employ its workers and is continuing to keep their lights open to serve their community. And there is any number of ways that we can help you do that.
Right. Thank you, Daryl. And I know one matter that you referred to me for an ethnic restaurant in a low-income area, and people said, why should we do this pro bono? It's a for-profit entity. And one of the things that you said is, well, the number of employees that this entity utilizes are, low-income workers. And if it shuts down for financial reasons, there'll be more unemployed on the rolls and more homeless. So, it's a very interconnected weave. So I really appreciate that you emphasize that. And so the other prong of this panel is policy. So I think, and I see Vanessa smiling because Appleseed does focus on policy and advocacy that makes policy changes. So Vanessa, I'll let you give us a couple examples of how you use pro bono and your full-time folks.
Great, thank you, Susie. So we do focus on policy. At DC Appleseed, we come to our policy projects with an open mind. We are nonpartisan, and we make an effort to start every project by looking at all the potential options rather than coming in with a predetermined solution. So one of the biggest ways we use pro bono attorneys for policy is actually research. And our research varies from tiny, well, not tiny, but small issue focused research memos, sometimes on a particular piece of legislation or a recent development in an area we handle regularly, we also have much more involved long-term project teams. So for example, DC Appleseed's been involved in reducing the number of HIV cases in the District of Columbia for 20 years. We have a public-private partnership with the DC government, and our project team that works on that has actually been involved with us for over 20 years. So we have everything from very short engagements. I recently worked with Susie to assign a gun safety research project to her volunteers. I anticipate that project will be done within approximately 6 weeks, or that phase of the project. We may find ways to continue it on if the attorneys are interested in that. But then we have these longer term engagements where we work with a law firm or we work with an individual for many years on what we call our project teams. Our staff actually really exists to support our volunteers. So my office has 5 full-time staff. As you might have noticed before, we cover a lot of projects for 5 full-time staff. We are very much project managers here at DC Appleseed. While we have expertise in the areas that we cover, a lot of the work that we do is really supporting and setting our pro bono attorneys up for success. For me, one of the most important factors in any pro bono relationship is actually the motivation of the volunteers involved. I never want to assign someone a pro bono engagement that they don't feel strongly about. It is the fire and it is the desire to do something good that really creates that sort of magical synergy of pro bono work where you have, a nonprofit and a law firm, or someone maybe not law firm background, but someone who's doing work in their personal capacity or outside of their core practice. For me, the key to really getting that great result or that great collaboration is making sure people are working on a project that excites them, and also making sure you're working in a way that fits that individual schedule. I find that volunteers have wildly different schedules, and often that's actually one of the barriers to litigation pro bono, is like the court dates and things like that. So I always have a conversation with our pro bono attorneys about, what does your schedule look like? What is your workflow? Does it work for you to have as needed meetings, or would you prefer to have a standing meeting every so often? So I encourage you, when you think about pro bono, not only to think about the work that you're aiming to do or the goal you're aiming to achieve, but I also encourage you to find organizations that fit or can fit your particular work setting, because it really makes a difference in how attainable and feasible it is for you to stay engaged for a long time. To give you an idea of the specific pro bono projects that we've had attorneys work on, one project we're working on right now is analyzing some pending gun safety legislation that's pending in the DC Council. DC tends to face a lot of scrutiny on its gun laws. That's the basis of the Heller lawsuit, for any of you who are familiar with that. So we're always looking at pending gun legislation to see if we can make recommendations for how it might withstand constitutional scrutiny. But then we have projects all the way over in a totally different camp. Right now, we are actually looking at the Anacostia River cleanup. We've been involved in that for about 20 years, but we're coming up to a point where there are some key community decision points. So we're working with pro bono volunteers to create fact sheets or simple summaries about the different phases of the Anacostia River cleanup, and where community members can have input, and boiling down these really complicated administrative and regulatory concepts to plain language summaries that people who don't have a background in the law or don't have a background in environmental science can understand what the rubber hits the road impact is for their communities and where they can get their voice held. excuse me. So that's two very different projects. One's a much shorter project, one's a much longer unfolding project, but they're all being championed by volunteers with the support of DC Appleseed.
Thanks, Vanessa. I think those are great illustrations of how you can really make a difference without going to court in very interesting and impactful policy areas. And so I think Jim Joseph has had really a fascinating pro bono career. And I would say, even though, I think primarily as an example of transactional work, he's also, I think, sort of married that with some policy work as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim to talk about a few of his representations.
Good, thanks, Susie. You do have an opportunity at a law firm to get a wide variety of exposure to issues. And I always tell people that when they're looking at pro bono, they should look at take two different approaches. One is, what are the substantive skills that I really want to learn? And use the pro bono program that way so that you can sort of do good while you're sort of learning these things. You're negotiating a complex contract, whereas a first or second year associate, you might not be doing that. You might be stuck in your office doing the drafting, but you're not as engaged as you would be if you're the one handling it. And then the second is an issue that you're passionate about. One of my predecessors as head of our tax group is a big animal rights person. And so he always did quite a bit of pro bono every year, always in that area, because that's what he loved. And I think my work has sort of fallen into three general categories. I think Daryl talked quite sort of well about the operational and transactional. Nonprofits have everything that a business has. And so if you're a corporate lawyer, if you're a tax lawyer, you can do employment taxes. If you're an employment lawyer, they have to hire and fire people. So, that's a really good opportunity, and they really need help because they can get themselves into a lot of trouble when they try and do it either on the cheap or on their own. So, that's one thing. The other I would describe as more substantive work, and just a couple or a few examples. One parallels over into the policy, which I'll talk about in a minute, and that's my work for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. I'm the former chair of that organization, but I was very involved in election protection. After the 2000 election, I was very naive, and I sort of didn't realize there were still so many barriers to voting in this country. And, I grew up in New York, moved to Washington. We didn't really have those kinds of barriers that we saw in Florida in 2000. And after that, I got very involved in the Lawyers Committee and working on election protection, which requires researching the voting rights or the voting rules for every state, helping to put together materials that can then be distributed to volunteers, volunteering to do hotlines, volunteering to be a poll watcher on election day. And that is something that you can fit into your schedule quite well. Because if you're researching the voting rules in North Dakota and Arizona, you can do that any time of the day or night. You don't have to do it on as rigidly a schedule. And I know Arnold and Porter, every major election, we will have 100 plus people. I remember one election, we had 300 lawyers volunteering in the field on election day. So again, a lot of firms are more than happy, and it's easier to carve out a day maybe than carve out a bunch of little time. Another one, I saw someone when they were logging on, someone from Whitman Walker, and this is a little old, but it's an example of different skills. Years ago, Whitman Walker was in some financial trouble, and we helped to convert them into what's called a federally qualified health center, which then gives them a huge amount of benefits, extra reimbursement from the federal government, liability protection under a federal law, there are certain governance things that needed to be put in place, but it's just this wide range with our, our policy people, our FDA folks, sort of the tax and governance people. So it was incredibly beneficial to the organization. And, I learned something about federally qualified health centers that I have since used in my paying career. And people are always surprised I know anything about it. And then the third is in just COVID. We did a ton of training on the PPP with our New York office and with the New York Yankees. We did training for all businesses in the Bronx for the PPP and how to apply for it. We did thousands of PPP applications for organizations. We also helped even more employees get unemployment benefits and other things. So, again, there's a lot of those opportunities, and it certainly was something that came up in COVID, just in an unbelievable way. And the last is the policy work. And another one from recent years with COVID, I represented the James Beard Foundation. My feeling was if we came out of COVID and all of our favorite restaurants were gone, life was not going to be worth living. And so I worked with people on Capitol Hill and with our public policy people in structuring some of the benefits that Congress ended up putting in place to benefit restaurants. Had a frustrating experience. I came up with what I thought was a really great idea, modeled on World War II bonds, war bonds, but for restaurants. And it was something that Senator Warner loved the idea, tried to move it along and just never could. But it was something interesting and cool to work on that I had never done before. And then another area is the reproductive rights. I've represented NARAL and Planned Parenthood. First pro bono project I did was for Planned Parenthood reviewing judicial nominees. And then I've worked on every single Supreme Court nomination since Souter, sometimes for, sometimes against, but all of that was through my work for Planned Parenthood and NARAL. And with Justice Sotomayor's nomination, I actually got brought in by the White House to help them because I had gained a lot of experience. And the then chairman of the firm said to me, well, why are they asking you? You're just a tax lawyer, which I thought was an amusing. It's like, okay, yes, but no.
But you can do so much more. And Jim, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute, especially when you're talking about working for Planned Parenthood, because I'm aware of our time and I want to make sure to have time for Q&A at the end. And when you mentioned Planned Parenthood and reproductive rights, our final panelist really marries sort of an issue that many of us are passionate about, reproductive rights and transactional pro bono. So Kathy, as she mentioned, is part of a group that is coordinating the Abortion Defense Network. So I'm going to ask her to talk about what they're doing.
Yes, thank you, Susie, no problem. So as I said at the top, this is really a collaborative effort. It's these 6 national reproductive rights organizations, which are the ACLU, the Center for Reproductive Rights, If, When, How, the National Women's Law Center, and Resources for Abortion Delivery. And then 7 national law firms, Arnold and Porter, Goodwin Procter, Hogan Lovells, MoFo, O'Melveny, Paul Weiss, and Wilmer. Those are our partner organizations. The Lawyering Project houses and manages the Abortion Defense Network. So what that means is that we train and vet and provide values-aligned attorneys to provide legal advice and representation to the clients that come through the Abortion Defense Network. We are targeting providers and supporters. I think I actually missed one of the repro rights organizations, If, When, How, is also one of our partner organizations. They tend to handle patients directly, so and provide this kind of support for patients and abortion seekers. We are focused on providers and supporters. And the folks who come through the Abortion Defense Network are typically, although we do provide representation in ongoing criminal and civil matters that are in court, typically what we're being asked to provide is confidential legal advice. And so some of those folks do get their advice through the repro rights organizations that I've mentioned, but a lot are receiving their counsel through the pro bono services that are being donated by these firms and other firms that are working with us as well. So at the Abortion Defense Network, we provide training and materials and other resources to the firm so that they are fully prepared to work in this space. The repro rights organizations can stay involved as the law firms need in order to provide a get check or any additional information. And the focus is simply on getting the clients the help that they need to do the work that they need to do in order to provide access to abortion in this country as best as we possibly can these days.
So Cassie, I want to,
Yeah.
a question. When you say clients, are they individuals who are trying to access reproductive rights services, or are they clinics or doctors that are wanting to provide the services?
So the patients and supporters are typically helped by If, When, How, which runs the reproductive legal helpline and has for many years. They are one of our partner organizations and sort of fall under the umbrella of services that we provide, but that organization does that work directly. The pro bono services that I'm talking about here today is focused on this providers and supporters. And we mean those two terms really broadly. And we get a full spectrum of clients coming through. Some of them are individuals, but they're also abortion clinics, clinic staff members, abortion funds, practical support organizations. So for those of you who don't know, those are organizations that provide logistical support for folks who need to move physically around in order to get the help that they need. Allied healthcare providers, researchers, advocates, grassroots activists, individuals. We've had all sorts of people calling or coming into the Abortion Defense Network. And we get a wide variety of questions. A lot of these are questions that other folks have tapped on in their talks. Some of them are questions that you would expect. They're abortion law related questions. What is my right to provide care to out-of-state patients, right? Now that we are living in this new legal landscape, what an abortion fund or PSO that wants to help somebody travel across state lines, what are the legal risks and limitations to doing so? How do these MIFI cases that have been going on recently impact the work that I do? But also there are just day-to-day questions that have to be answered in order for these organizations to do the work that we need them to do. So, there might be questions about setting up a new legal entity, or how to develop good employment practices, or drafting a contract that needs to be signed on to. All that kind of work needs to happen in order for these folks to do the work that provides care and access to abortion in this country.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. That's probably the variety of questions. You probably get some and thought, well, this is a first. So for sharing. It looks like we just have about 10 minutes left. So I want to open up the floor to questions. I'm going to check the chat as we. So if you have a question, please put it in.
Yep, I'll remind everyone, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A, or if you want to ask your question personally, if you'll just raise your hand and I will give you the ability to do that in person. I'm checking the chat. I don't see any questions there, so I'm looking in Q&A.
So while she's checking, and I think I cut Jim off, and
No, that's good. That's good. One of the things that Cassie mentioned that I know we helped with, and I'm pretty sure it was through your group, was coming up with advice for businesses, for-profit businesses, employers who wanted to provide travel benefits to their employees. And I've done a series of trainings for major corporations on this. across the country. If you're located in Texas and you're a major company and you have a benefit where you're giving people certain money or reimbursements to travel out of state to get reproductive care, are you doing something wrong? Are you violating the law in Texas? And it's down to this specific things of telling companies, if you can have an HR person outside of Texas answering these questions about the benefits you provide, it's probably smart to do that. Because they're very aggressive in their extraterritorial reach or their attempt to do that. So it's just this practical stuff. That's why we have precedent, and you don't do away with it after 50 years overnight.
So I want to call on each panelist while, if there's a question, Christina can interrupt me.
We do have a question. Sorry.
Okay.
Yep, we do have a question, and I will read it off if that's okay. From Anonymous. Okay, that's okay. What opportunities do you think having a law degree gave you that you didn't have before? And I think I will narrow that just a little bit, right? Because we could talk about that for hours. But talk about it in terms of sort of pro bono service and what things you might be able to do, because we do have lots of law students here, and they're probably thinking, I can't do pro bono as a law student, which is wrong. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Election protection is one good example. We have a lot of law students helping out. There's also, again, it's volunteering in these areas, doing voter registration or voter get out the vote in a lot of campuses. There's a lot of state rules that say, you can't have your university ID for voting. And there are a bunch of groups who are organizing volunteers on campus to go visit their state legislatures and do, that kind of activism work. And, being a lawyer just helps you know how to do that better and be a little more comfortable with the lingo.
Any other panelists want to address the question?
I would, if you're having trouble finding pro bono opportunities at your law school, I would encourage you to contact your law school's pro bono coordinator. I find that sometimes people just don't know where to look for the opportunities, but they are out there. I, for example, worked with domestic violence survivors during law school. I answered questions with legal information, which is different from legal advice, under the supervision of a trainer at womenslaw.org. So I would literally answer emails from people experiencing interpersonal violence about their legal options and the resources available. So there are a wide array of different opportunities out there. And in my experience, the biggest way to get involved, or the best way to get involved with specifically opportunities appropriate to law students, is to find your pro bono coordinator at your law school.
And I would add to that, tap into the clinics at your law schools. I was really involved with the death penalty clinic while I was in law school, and I traveled to the South, and I did, a couple of years of really amazing work with practitioners who were on the ground doing this work and providing this service, and were relying on the law students to give them really essential help. So you can make opportunities for yourself and find them at your law school. If you're near a big city, there's lots of volunteer opportunities, I'm sure, but even if you're not, your law school, I was not near a big city, and your law school should have opportunities through clinics as well.
Susie, I'll just quickly add that typically at the Pro Bono Center, we utilize law students or to help both with intake and during consultations to be note takers. But one of the things you learn is when you're talking, and part of this is true with and both, I think Cassie and Vanessa mentioned this, like if you're working at a clinic the only way to learn how to work with clients is to work with clients. And when you're able to do that as a law student, even if you're just sort of a fly on the wall listening, it's the same thing you'd be doing as an early associate with the partner who's handling a transaction. You want to get those reps early. And I'll just say for myself, as both a law student, I think I did intake for our family law litigation clinic. And then when I started volunteering, you start to feel more like a lawyer when you have your own clients. And this is a part of what makes pro bono so important. And as a law student, it helps to make it a little bit easier once you're going to be in a situation where you graduate and you can do this for a living.
Great. Christina, any other questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, so I have one, of course.
Mhm.
And this is going to be your ending soundbite in keeping with this panel. The advantages or benefits of effecting change through outside the courtroom without litigation. I think we've all when I went to law school, I thought I was going to change the world through doing impact litigation. And I think you all demonstrate that you can make a difference without litigation. So what's what would you say primary benefits of making change without litigation? Vanessa, I'll call on you first, just because.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I actually view individual representation and policy work as two sides of the same coin. I would not give up my time as a litigator and a poverty lawyer for anything, in part because the knowledge I gained working with literally thousands of clients and experiencing their path through the court system really informs particularly my equity work now. It is hard, as I am a white middle-class individual who went to 2 private schools, right? So for me, working with individuals experiencing poverty, seeing how people of color, people who grew up without a strong economic background, people who experience discrimination on the regular, to see what that looks like on a person-to-person basis over a period of 15 years really changed who I am as a person, in addition to changing my career trajectory. I started in policy, went to individual representation, and came back to policy, but they are not different things. They are two sides of the same coin. And I think if you're engaging in policy without that individual knowledge, you're really missing a key piece. So I'm not totally sure I completely answered your question, but that's my viewpoint on that.
Great perspective. Daryl, you want to weigh in?
Sure. And I'll just say, working with individual segments of organizations, and I'm going to take a quick moment to shout out like a particular group of small businesses, and in some cases nonprofits, that I've worked with over the course of the last almost 15 years that I've been at the Pro Bono Center. Community-based daycare centers. For those of us who have kids, for those of us who don't, we have folks in our neighborhoods who are supporting working families, working parents, communities, schools. In some cases, they're working in their homes, they're working in their basements, they're working in their centers. We have supported them in starting, in expanding, and in none of the cases that we've worked with have we ever had to manage them in a litigation. We've helped them start, we've helped them expand, we've helped them grow. And that growth changes neighborhoods, changes the lives and the trajectories of the kids that go to those daycare centers, of the kids who then go to school, of the parents who send their kids there. And there are so many different ways in which non-litigation or outside of the courtroom, where the breadth and the depth of your expertise can help those people. I just think it's really important and valuable. And I always tell my students this, like, it's really easy in law school to be really myopic about what your options are. And that's nonsense. There's way more options than you even think there are.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. Jim, I see you're unmiked, I think.
Yeah, I forgot. I think to really effectuate change, you need all the tools in the toolbox. And so that goes from that grassroots individual level all the way through education and outreach to policy and to litigation and that impact litigation. And so, you can do it up to the courtroom steps. And I think that really to be effective and have that change, you really have to, and you have to think about it that broadly too. And that's the one thing I've learned more than anything in recent years.
Great response. And Cassie,
I don't have a lot to add, other than to say, and maybe reiterate what the other folks have said, which is that, you know, in seeing the myriad of questions that are coming through the Abortion Defense Network, what I really have come to more fully appreciate is that there are so many ways to effectuate change, and there are so many different skills that are needed to help our clients. And so don't ever undermine your own power. Just find the opportunities where you find your passion and do something with it.
great. I think those are great words to end on. And I want to thank our panelists. I love this panel. Might even want to do it twice a year. My veterans, Jim Joseph and Daryl Maxwell, you guys were fabulous as always. And Vanessa and Cassie, you brought really new important perspectives, and really appreciate each one of you taking the time to join us and inspire us today. So